Okay, right, so here we are, listening to the valve rectifier side of the pedal through this very nice Pro Reverb amp with JBL speakers. We're using the EQ1 reamp EQ, which is designed to sound good through this kind of amp. And it does. So this is what it sounds like. Bit of double tone there. Okay, so that's brilliant. Now we're looking at these controls here and what they do for people. So if this was like a deluxe reverb, it would sound much the same, but it'd have the BRI-CAP. So let's turn the BRI-CAP up, and then this is what our pedal now sounds like. It's kind of still sounds quite nice, but it could like kill a person if they stood too close to it. So what we've done is we have this BRI-CAP cut, and that basically cuts the treble off using the opposite response to this one. So it's designed to work with specifically with this amp, with Marshall amps, with Vox amps, and with the custom model you have this switch on the front. It's got 3 different frequencies that apply to this control. So one is the highest frequency that would work on like a deluxe reverb or a Vox. Then we've got number 2, which would work on a Fender or a JTM 45 Marshall, and then the 3rd setting will work on like a single tone control Fender or something where it's not really a BRI-CAP anymore, but it's almost like a tone control that feeds off the volume control. So there you go. It's quite a powerful control. But if we put it to the number 2 setting, oh god, right, and then what we're going to do is set it to try and we're going to put the bright on here, cut it back to cancel it out, and then we'll switch the bright off and put this back before, and we'll see how close we manage to get to the tone that we had here without the BRI-CAP engaged. So that's the goal, and not this. Okay, so let's turn the control up. I'm going to just play some open strings so we can hear what happens to the sound. So that's it all the way up. That's probably going to be overkill. So let's back it off a little. So that sounds pretty good. Okay, so let's turn that back to the flat level, which is fully counterclockwise. Turn that off and see what the tone's like. Okay, and the BRI-CAP back on the amp. This back to where we had it. Okay, so that works pretty well. And if we wanted to use it through the Vox, which has a different size cap across the volume control, then we would just go to the control on the front and put it on position 1, and then it would be just as effective on the Vox as we've heard on here. Okay, so that's that control. Let's put everything back to normal. Right, okay, so we've got the plus and minus shelf. It's a high shelf control. So when it's in the middle, it's flat. When you turn it counterclockwise, it rolls the treble off by 6 dB, so that makes the treble half as loud. When you put it counterclockwise, it boosts the treble, makes it twice as loud. And again, on the custom model, on this side, we have got high shelf frequency control with 3 positions again. The idea is that you have your amp set up how you want it for your bypass sound. So for example, if it was like, there's a high watt behind me, if it was the high watt, then I might have quite a lot of presence on there, so it'd be really sort of bright sounding, but the presence operates on quite a high frequency. So if I found that in getting the dry signal the way I wanted it, that I boosted the fizz of the distortion, boosted all those really kind of high frequency harmonics and made it sound horrible. Then I could use the high shelf to compensate for the high presence control on that amp, and I would select position 1 because that works on the highest frequencies. Position 2 would work on something like a Marshall, and position 3 is suited for the blackface. So this is a blackface, so I'm going to put it on position 3, and we are going to make some adjustments to the amp and just use the control to compensate. Okay, so this is how it's sounding at the moment. Okay, now let's say I really like jazz or something like that, and I turn it down, the treble down to 4. It's kind of taken all the fun out of the overdrive. So I could live with that, but I prefer to have a bit more treble, so I'm going to just turn this treble back up, and hopefully it gets us back to where we were before. Okay, and let's say that I was completely deaf, which might be true after some of the recording that we've done today. And if I put the treble on 10, then it sounds like this. And if I completely cut the treble on the pedal, it should get back to how we started. Okay, I think that's hopefully the case, so let's put it back on 7 where we started, put this back flat, hopefully it sounds the same when I was right. And on this occasion I was, so that's brilliant. Right, so let's move to these controls on this side. So the reason there's a mid boost in the pedal is because something like a Vox, the tone stack is capable of removing all the mids. So the idea was to provide a control that could put all the mids back in again. So that works, but in practice it can be quite difficult to match up your mid boost with the mid cut of an amp. So really I think it's going to be most useful as just like a solo boost, something to cut through a mix in a live situation, and just without having to get ridiculously loud, you can just cut through. Well, you know, you just kind of carve out an area of the frequency of the bandwidth of the band that is yours, and you use that little mid frequency just to pop up through the mix. So let's hear how that sounds. So we've got mid level, which is how much boost, and we've got mid frequency, which is, I guess, pretty obviously that's the frequency. So the mid sign in the middle, the mid is off. When it points to this kind of coppery colour, that's this channel that's the mid will be enabled for. When it's got the silver dot, that's this channel. Also in the mid position you can put in the foot switch, and then when you hit the mid button on the foot switch, then it will engage the mid just as completely independent of what channel you're on. But let's assign it to the channel we're on, which is the silicon channel. And I'll toggle it on and off, and you can hear the effect. Right, so this is it off. Is it on? Okay, so let's sweep through the frequencies. This is the lowest frequency. And then the highest frequency. I'll try and sweep through them while I've got a chord ringing out. It might work, or a couple of notes. And then off. So it's not supposed to be over the top. That's actually quite a lot of boost when you hear it in the context of a band, because it does kind of reveal the guitar sound so much. But with this, particularly with the sweep of frequencies, It's like everything's supposed to be very usable. We don't want people to kind of be lost with this much functionality. Everything should be capable of, wherever you got it set, it will deliver a usable sound. So that's the kind of the approach that I took with choosing the frequencies there. The blend control on the clockwise side delivers all overdrive. Now as you turn it counterclockwise, it introduces more dry signal, and then when you fully clockwise, it's completely dry. Now the strength of the signal on this dry side is determined by this dry gain, and that's because if you've got weak pickups in your guitar or whatever, you might need to compensate so that you get a usable sweep on this control. So let's hear what the blend sounds like. I find that when you use the blend control, it's best to have a sound dialed in that suits your amp. So, because you're going to be hearing like the sound of the amp, so it's best to have like the clean sound of your amp blended in with a bit of overdrive that would sound like it's coming from your amp naturally as well. If you have like a really kind of muddy amp and a really bright overdrive, lots of like the presence up really high or something, then it sounds like you're putting two things together that don't really belong together. So this is how I would do it. I would not have too much gain, and just the idea is to take your kind of overdriven sound and use the clean just to make it sound a bit fuller and round. Well, that's certainly sort of my approach. So this is the overdriven sound. Okay, so, and then the dry sound, so it sounds like this. Okay, and then with it in the middle, we get a bit of both. And this is just the overdrive. And then back with the blend. So it just allows the dynamics of your playing, where the overdrive basically puts a ceiling on the dynamics. Having that clean signal back in means that when you dig in, it gets louder basically. It gives you more weight and more power to the notes. I really like it with slide. Kind of gives it some kind of Derek Trucksy type thing versus the full overdrive, which I think sort of sounds a bit more Dwayne Allman. But I don't really play like either of those guys. But this is here you go anyway. So this is the blended tone. And then just the overdrive. And then the blended again. So there you go, that's that function. Okay, so here's the foot switch that I mentioned earlier. So let's see how that works. So I'm just going to go back to my fully overdriven sound. I've got the mid dialed in here, but I haven't got it assigned to a channel. So I can play and I can just use this as almost like a separate sort of mid pedal, but it's all built in. Okay, so that's nice and easy. Okay, so let's look at the blend override, what that does. So I'm going to dial in, with the same channel, I'm going to dial in, I'm going to turn the dry gain down, and I've got the blend like more near the dry end. So this is what it sounds like. Now when I do blend override, it's the same as having that control fully clockwise. So it's going to be full distortion or the overdrive sound. Let's just turn that up a bit. So it's a bit like having an extra channel, if you like. Okay, now if I turn the dry gain, if I have to turn the dry gain up, then I can make it so that this blend setting here is actually louder than my overdriven sound, which is like a way to go from having like an overdriven sound, which is normally has like a ceiling on the dynamics, like we said. I can actually then jump to like a clean, louder solo, which is a really nice thing to do, I think. So see how that sounds. I'm guessing that's going to be set about right. So it'd go from. So it's nice, because sometimes you don't want to play with loads of overdrive, even though it's a great overdrive pedal. Sometimes you want to just, well, particularly with a cranked amp, sometimes you just want to be a bit louder, but not as distorted, and you turn everything up, and it just gets more and more distorted, not any louder. So that gives you a way to have the best of the amp sound, but then to go back to having almost like as if you've switched to a larger, cleaner amp. So I really like that feature. So we're powered into the power amp of this Blues Deluxe. It's not really a great sounding preamp on it. I think everybody pretty much agrees that. So, you know, it's a nice solution. But we're going to use this opportunity to show what the 3 dip switches do on the back of the pedal. So let's start with number 3, just to be different. So I've got this dialed in for an overdrive with a ghost tone. So let's hear the kind of ghost tones that we're getting. Okay, so that's set to the British mode. So it's what an amp would sound like in Britain with the British mains frequency going, you know, powering the amp and interacting with the guitar signal. Now if I flick the dip switch number 3 up, then it changes the frequency inside the pedal and it changes it to US mains. So those ghost notes are now a different frequency. And then back. I'll just run up, like playing all the semitones, and we can hear what the difference is. So. And the US mode. So this appeals to me on a fairly kind of crazy level. Whereas if I'm trying to, like, if I'm listening to my favourite Allman Brothers track and I think I can hear some ghosting, then I can kind of recreate that, and that's just the kind of level that my brain operates at. It's sort of obsessive, but I'm sure there's plenty of other people that are obsessive out there as well. So what dip switch number 2 does is it changes this valve channel here to another silicon channel, because I think the silicon channel's really good, and there's so many great amps out there that are solid state that it's nice to have like just 2 different patches of the same thing, where you can have one dialed for like a rhythm sound or whatever, or to sound like a Fender Twin, and the other one to sound like a Marshall or whatever. So I think that just adds a bit of extra flexibility there. Okay, so dip switch number 1 is a really useful feature. If you're using the pedal into a power amp and you are switch to the power amp, reamp, EQ mode, then, well, when the pedal's in bypass, as it currently is, your guitar is going to sound really dull because it's just going through this full range flat power amp. But if you put the dip switch in the up position, this is dip switch number 1, and then it routes the signal through the active preamp switch. So when I say the active switch, for example, because I've got the silicon rectifier channel selected, then this preamp switch is active. If I was to change channels like this, then this one's active. So I could have this side set up. Well, let's hear what it sounds like. So this is what it sounds like in the middle setting. Then I could switch to the GB setting. And then the US setting. And then with it off and flat, it'd be... So that means that you have got essentially, well, you've got the 2 channels already, then you've got the blend override, which gives you another channel. This just gives you sort of like an extra clean channel out of the one pedal, so it's added some nice flexibility there.